All right. So we are here today with Rick Williams, one of the main developers for an indie game called The Sand Knight. My name is Chris Yeti, and I'll be your host today on Yeti Talks, a podcast where we jump into the depths of indie games. We're going to do a little interviewing, a little bit of reviewing, and then we're going to just jump forward from there. Okay. So we have Rick Williams here with us today, and the game that he's working on is called The Sand Knight. So thank you for joining us today, Rick.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You bet. Can you tell me a little bit about the Sand Knight? What inspired you to make this game?
So, the Sand Knight, at its core, it's a sprite-style mech warrior. The game got started because there's an artist that I have collaborated with for years. He goes by ISO Sprites. He created a really neat mech sprite for a game jam, and he showed it to me, and we were just like, "Hey, this is really cool. We should put it in a more fleshed out game than just that weekend game jam." So we got together a group of people for a month long game jam, and after that first month, we we had something that was a fun little base project, and we said, "Oh, this is cool. Let's add a couple features." So we put another month on it, and then we did another month, and then we got accepted to a convention when we just thought it would be fun to submit a demo,
Oh,
and then
wow.
we just kept going, and it just kind of organically grew. So it started out with a really cool piece of art, and then it just grew from there.
Well, that's sometimes the best way to produce something organically, just one great idea after another. It looks like you had started this back in 2021. Since this was shortly after the pandemic that everyone experienced, was did that have anything to do with the creation of this game, or were you making anything different back in the pandemic?
So this was a project that started off as a side thing that was just for fun with a bunch of people that we knew through game jams. I had been working on contract projects. There was a metaverse project when that was a big thing that I worked on as a game development consultant, helping with the UX design of things. I also was working on some educational game projects. If you've heard of the Amanita White Hat series, that was produced by the National Cryptologic Foundation, and it teaches kids how to be smart with their data online.
Oh, it's
So
fantastic.
so those were my primary contract gigs that I was using to pay my bills. But the Sand Knight started off as a project that was our passion project, the game that we wanted to just be in a giant robot and blow things up.
That's an awesome description. When when you got into this, or when tell me a little about your background with programming. Did you know from the beginning that you wanted to be a game developer, or did you think you might be dabbling in other areas, going to work for a company for app development or releasing your own non-gaming apps? Has there been a mix of that, or what's your experience there?
So it all goes back to when I was 4 or 5 years old and I was playing the Sega Genesis, and I very vividly remember playing Streets of Rage, and I would pick up
Yes.
lead pipes and swords and smack enemies over the head. And I thought to myself, wow, you know what? I would add these kinds of things in. And I if I was making this game, I would have done this differently. So that was the very beginning of when I knew that I had an interest in making games and making mechanics. So it throughout elementary school and middle school, I always knew that I wanted to get into making games. I was very interested doing stuff with the custom level editors in Age of Empires, StarCraft, Warcraft, even the very, very early versions of the Unreal Engine when it came with Unreal Tournament 2003. And as I went, I took computer science AP classes in high school. I dabbled in it in college. I took a series of classes. And then when I eventually got tired of school. I was just, I was a very ADHD kind of person,
Hmm.
and I was so sick of taking classes that I took some time off and went and started other businesses. So I got into contract painting and for houses that were new construction where I would paint them in interior coating, just like whatever color that they wanted
Sure.
because
Yeah.
the construction company would leave them construction white. Then I got into a construction supply business, and that was a fairly successful wholesaling business. And I continued after I did that for a few years. I realized that I needed to go back to my calling of making games. And in 2015, I really made the commitment to sit down and learn how to do it seriously.
That's fantastic and inspiring. Nothing like a couple of summers of construction jobs to really sort your life out. It's like, what do I really want to be doing with the rest of my life as you're painting those long strokes? Yes.
You kind of take a moment where you're working a job that you got because it was practical, and you extrapolate into the future, and you realize that you only have one life to live, and you don't want to look back on your life when you're retired and be full of regret that you never took the shot at the thing you always wanted to do.
If we're fortunate enough to be on that scene of our deathbed, with our family around us, we don't want those regrets creeping up. So that's a great output. You had mentioned back on the Sega Genesis. That's a callback for me as well. Did you ever play the game Road Rash?
Road Rash, that one I never had.
It was a motorcycle game, and it'd be racing, but you would also have these melee weapons, and you would try to beat the other guy off of their bike. It was a big Sega Genesis game for me. I don't know if you ever got into Sega Channel. Do you remember that? That was quite a throwback. It was the first online cable experience for a console.
Was that
And
like a Dreamcast thing?
no, it was Sega Genesis. And
Really?
yeah, you had to have DSL. It was like the high speed back in the late 90s. And you could pay a subscription. It was like $30 a month, and they would list out 100 games or so that on a library that you could go and select from. And then every month it would change that list out to a new 100 games. And so it was from that experience I got to play a large variety of Sega Genesis games, and so I definitely know the game that you're talking about, and it's a great throwback.
I remember that now. Yeah, I couldn't convince my parents to pay for that.
Yeah, it's like, can you pay? That was back then when the parents didn't know much about gaming as it was. They may have thought of Pong back when they were kids, or Tetris and things like that, but trying to
Yeah.
convince parents in the 90s to get gaming material was way harder than it is today.
You, I did a study of all of the older games. There was a class at the school that I went to called Gaming History, and I got to play through all of the old eras of games starting in there was like Tennis for Two. That was the first
Okay,
video
yeah.
game ever made. And but then you go through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and you play all of these games. And one thing that I realized was if I grew up in that era, I would not have liked games as much as I did
Hmm.
because by the late 80s and into the 90s, they really started to refine the polish and the UX of what games could be. So our formative years were spent with really, really good games that could captivate you.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
don't think that I don't think that games like E.T. were the kind of games that would have made me love games.
And that's infuriating as well. That games like ET, they recaptured this extreme value decades later, for I don't even want to say nostalgic purposes. And if you remember, there was kind of this mad rush, maybe about 10 years ago, where this guy found an ET game in the landfill, and now he's flipping it on eBay for thousands of dollars. And it's like, but nobody played it. Why does anybody care? That everyone hated this game, and they just because they found it and it's an old console.
Well, most of them that were produced ended up getting like buried in the desert in Nevada
Mm,
or something.
neat. That little quasi time capsule.
Yeah.
So with the Sand Knight, can you tell me about where did that name come from? Was it just kind of a quick description of what you thought was going on, or did the game follow the name?
So the name itself was kind of a code name for the mech, and we were just referring to it as the Sand Knight, and that just ended up sticking.
Do you want to keep evolving this game? Do you is it kind of a springboard for a new game that will be coming out in the future for you? What do you think the plans are for the Sand Knight?
So the Sand Knight was ultimately the culmination of years and years of collaboration between me and the artist ISO Sprites. We met back in school. We were actually neighbors in the same neighborhood when we were, um, in earlier years of our lives. So that's how we originally knew each other. And one day we got to talking, and it turns out I was making games with Unity, and he was really into pixel art. So we just said, "Hey, you know what? Let's put our heads together and see if we can make something cool. You do the art, I'll do the programming." And and it took us several years of iterating through different kinds of styles and different mechanics. And teaching him how the art had to be formatted so that I could use it in Unity, and on my end, learning how to creatively utilize the artwork that was produced. So it was a culmination of probably 6 different projects and many different iterations of how our characters could, how the art and the gameplay could come together. So we are very interested in seeing where we can take this, take the community that's built up around the project. We've got a fairly decent size server, a Discord server that follows the game, and we've got a lot of different connections that we've built throughout the course of making the project. In building the project, it's become an exercise in learning how to effectively make a project that's of a certain scale and how to rapidly create content. So it took us 2 years to build what we have now, but with the lessons that we've learned, we could build it again in 6 months. So it is definitely something that interests us to expand it. This game was built with the scope of an arcade game where you go through a linear experience, but we could easily take it and expand the scope of it to be a Mass Effect style clone where you have levels that take place with a lot more story and an overworld that functions a lot like the old Mass Effect games did.
Mhm. Now, I don't know if you ever had the chance to play other consoles when you were growing up. You had mentioned the Sega Genesis. Did you ever get a chance to explore the SNES as
Yes.
well? Did you ever play the Final Fantasy? It's confusing, but I think they called it 6 in America. Uh, and it was the original sprites. And in the beginning, they had one of the main characters. They not as the same depth that your game is focused on, but you would jump into a mech, and they kind of had this whole mech warrior scene in the world of Final Fantasy. And it was the first time I ever played a game like that, and I get some level of nostalgia from that experience when I played the Sand Knight as well. And I found that pretty interesting. Now they're two totally different genres. Final Fantasy, especially the old world, being more traditional, the first generation of RPG, and then your game is more of a top-down shooter game, and it has some levels of a Contra feel. How
Yeah,
many
go ahead.
levels, and where does the game evolve? Because I did play the demo last night for about an hour or so, and I noticed the difficulty kept increasing. Does that keep going, or how long would you say the game time is total?
It really depends on how used to the genre you are. If you are used to roguelike shooters, if you've played a lot of games like Binding of Isaac or Hotline Miami, you'll probably understand the fundamental mechanics where just keep moving and keep shooting, and you'll be pretty successful with that alone. So if you're good like that, you might beat it even your first time through, and that'll be about a 90-minute experience. But then the idea of it being a roguelike is there's different upgrade paths that you can take, and you can challenge yourself to get the best score that you can. You do the fastest run and get the highest density of destruction for the time that you can. There's also a horde mode in the game where you just survive as long as you can with steadily increasing sizes of armies that you fight, and eventually they do overwhelm you.
Oh, I think that's awesome.
So that I would say the average player will take 2 to 4 attempts at the game to fully beat it, which would probably give you a good 3 to 6 hours before you're first clear of the story mode of the game. And if you're really into the mechanics, then you'll probably find satisfaction in it for a good 30 to 50 hours of gameplay.
Speaking of mechanics, one of the things that really stood out was the voiceover work in this game. Uh, I I
I like
found
that.
myself chuckling a few times. It almost felt kind of a multi-layered satire that was going on with it. Who helped you out with the voiceovers, and was that kind of your intention?
So all of the voices ended up being me.
Oh
I
wow, okay.
it's because I was very affordable and readily available to do the voice lines as I needed. I did have I asked a couple other people if they wanted to, but schedules never quite matched up. So for simplicity's sake, it's just been me. The So my voice of the female mechanic character ended up being one that grew on everybody over time, where it just became the canon voice of Sammy.
Yeah, I was very surprised to hear it because when I first started playing it, I think that I was just reading the text, and then about 5 minutes into the game, it just kicked in. And you had mentioned that the website version was a older version of the game than the one that you ended up releasing, and
Yes.
so that may have been part of it. But it caught me by surprise. I was like, oh, I was only expecting to read stuff here, and then you threw in some voiceovers. So great job there.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the almost every line in the game in the released version has has the voice acting in for it. So I do have to update the demo version that's on the website so that it's up to speed with what we have on Steam.
Yeah, you'll have to let me know when that comes out. I'll give it another round. So the game, it looks like you released it on January 10th to the Steam store. How has that gone for you? What experiences have you learned from that?
So there's definitely the swarm of spam email that you get. There's a lot of people who are asking for free Steam keys.
Huh.
But you learn a lot about the way that Steam works, particularly in the developer circles. You get everybody who has anything to say about Steam who will give you all of the wisdom that you kind of wish that you had unmasked beforehand, such as if you are releasing a game, what's most important is that you get up to at least 10 reviews, but preferably 50, because there's review buckets on Steam that determine whether you get a ranking of positive, very positive, or overwhelmingly positive
Hmm.
at 500 reviews. So if you can get to those benchmarks, then you get higher benchmarks of visibility on Steam. There's also the process of navigating the Curator Connect, where you can provide Steam keys to curators who who are not just emailing you asking you for keys. They can actually play test the game and leave a review for you.
I didn't realize that there was the equivalent of a panhandler for Steam keys. I guess that makes sense thinking about it. Do they just try to find your contact information and say, "Can I have a key?"
That is exactly what they do.
do, you, do
My spam folder has exploded.
oh my god.
I released it 2 weeks ago, and I've already gotten probably 80 emails at least. And there's so many people from this website called, like, it's called Bilibili or
Huh.
something, where it's basically China's YouTube or TikTok or something. And and the grammar is awful in every single one of these emails.
I
So
can has keys?
yeah, yeah. So what's actually interesting about that is maybe 1 in 20 is actually somebody legit. So you do want to look through and sift through the emails. You go through a lot of junk, but there are people who will legitimately, like, they will articulate themselves properly, and you can tell that it's somebody who's actually going to take your Steam key and review it and not just post it on a dark web website to
Yeah.
sell copies of your game.
Yeah, one of those reseller websites try to make a money
Yeah,
profit off it.
yeah. That's what most of the spam is. They're trying to scrape Steam keys from you, and you're trying to get promotion, and they're just selling the game
Yeah.
underneath.
I think G2A is a big one where they just resell hash Steam keys, and it's they've cracked down on it in a weird sense to that they make it more difficult to do that, and so people are creating fake Steam accounts. They buy the game and they try to sell that Steam account as a whole, but I don't think it's going to be a long term success for them.
Yeah,
Do you think that this happens to the majority of people who upload to Steam, no matter like the scale of
yeah.
their game budget?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that there are just bots that are constantly
Oh,
scanning
neat.
Steam, and they
Yeah.
know exactly where to look because a lot of these seem like automatically generated emails.
There's the theory that in about 2015, we passed more spammers and bots on the internet than humans. So it's very possible that that I'm a bot. You just don't know.
You're just an AI model.
Yeah.
Yeah, the one of the other interesting lessons that I learned was your community will really come through for you. And of all of the marketing that I did, it was everybody that I built a personal connection with really came through and told their friends, and the vast majority of our swell of sales came from that and our reviews. So so going forward and working on future projects, I'm going to try to emphasize the community building around the game a lot more than any other kind of outreach because it's generating
Mhm.
that connection with your super fans that seems to
Yeah.
have the most powerful impact on the efficacy of your release.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you know that expands beyond just programming, video games or not. When you're starting up a business, you know, say you want to go and start selling soap bars, you have to be really connected to your local community, not just local, but your niche community, and that's what gives you that stepping stone to the next level. And so it's great to hear that you've recognized that. What do you think sets your game apart from other indie games? Do you feel that you had that thought process while making the game, or that was completely dismissed and you were just focused on this particular product?
So when it comes to comparing against other games, we didn't do a whole lot of deep dive into, you know, how are we going to differentiate ourselves from the other games. We just set out to build the kind of game that the team wanted to build, that made the most sense for what we were building, and just build it to the best quality that we were capable. And it was a lot of fun to put it together, but it mostly came from playtesting and feedback rather than comparing against other games. So when we would go to conventions, we would go to MagFest and AwesomeCon in the Washington D.C. area, and you know, we showed the game in person at probably 15 events in the general
Oh, okay.
region, and we would bring people in and let them play test the game and get feedback, and then we would communicate with them over the Discord and get feedback from them, get some play test feedback, and we kind of allowed the game to be guided by the people who were playing the game and contributing to it, more so than directly trying to copy or be different from anybody else. It was what made sense for the game that we're building.
I think that's a great way to look at it. So many entry level developers, or maybe not even entry level, but a lot of the commonality of indie games is, you know, take something that's already existing and make a new skin for it. That's kind of the low hanging fruit, because you do generate some results by posting a new Flappy Birds, but instead of a bird, you have a blob or something. I mean, and it's been I mean, Flappy Birds itself was a rehash. It had this whole media about how it took assets from Mario. It got sued several times and taken down, and the main guy who made it took it down, and then a clone of that game went up and became this incredible success because it plugged this void of demand. And so I find that really interesting. Earlier, you had talked
There is
about. Oh, go ahead.
there is something to be said for having your finger on the pulse of the market and what games are popular and what people are going to be looking for next. Because if you can really tap into what game is currently scratching the itch for a large group of players, and then you can give them the next thing that is the perfect thing to move into, then you really can have economic success from that. I've heard that reading Steam reviews, you if you really dig into like the reviews of a genre that you want to clone, you read the reviews of the games that you would like to clone and see what people are requesting, and that can give you an idea of what you should build next.
It's so easy for a flood of people to come along and just list out a huge list of demands for the game to continue. I think I'm even guilty of that. I don't know if you play any horror games, but the most recent one I jumped into was Paranormal. And it's this multiplayer experience where you're supposed to go in and investigate the paranormal of a haunted house. And so it's just is quick. Like, okay, the game has limitations, but A, B, C, D, E, F would make it better, you know. And I'm sure they're looking at this, and the more developed the team is, they're just like, you know, how do we put this in our development cycle? Like, to just absorb it is a whole task on its own.
Yeah, to take an idea and work it in and figure out how that idea can be applied to the greater design, and then
Yeah.
to implement it in a timely fashion. That's a whole trick that it's what the industry is. You have to be good at what you do to be able to even take that base feedback and then go with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, you know, it goes hand in hand with, I don't know how far along you are in the study of development cycles, but they end up using like Kanban boards and Scrum methods. But when it comes to teamwork, how did you collaborate with the individual that provided the artwork? Was it kind of a daily collaboration, or did they just send you stuff every once in a while and you just kept chugging and plugging?
So there was in total about 11 people who contributed in some capacity. We had 4 people who were consistent contributors for the lifespan of our development, and then working with the other artists, we have worked together long enough that we have a certain kind of synchronicity in what we're trying to do. So we didn't have to do a lot of micromanaging of each other and what we were requesting. So the artist was very much a creative director where he would just kind of give me whatever he wanted to make, and I would then implement it and take his input on how it should behave, and then I would put my twist on it and balance it so that it was effective within the gameplay, that it wasn't, too strong or too easy or or uninteresting to play against. So I tried to do my best to add some design to the art and the concept that he provided to me.
Now,
And
oh, go ahead.
go ahead. No, you can ask your
Oh,
question.
I was just gonna say, did they ever give you feedback, play the implementation, and then follow up that feedback, or did they just kind of leave you with stuff and run with it?
Yeah, we went through some back and forth about the ways that certain units should be functioning. So, for example, I used a sometimes I would get sprite sheets and I wouldn't really be sure what the sprite sheet was, so I would do my best to interpret it, and then he would follow up and explain to me, "Oh, you know what? This is how I had intended for it to be played." And so I would then go in and make some changes or build a different variation of the unit that were the one that I built was fun to play against. So then we would also add another unit that would function according to his original design, add a color tint to it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's hypothetically say that you received $100 million in funding because of this game. What would you do next?
Oh man. So functionally limitless budget, but you still got to be somewhat intelligent about it.
Yeah, can't go Star Citizen.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of different ways that you could go with it. I think the big thing would be to try to build an adventure RPG where the progression of power happens a little slower and there's a lot more dispensation of story and exploration. I When you have a large budget, what you can do is you can bring people in and I would systematize the processes that we developed during the building of this game and create the kind of onboarding material that we could then bring in 4 or 5 different people who knew Unity, knew how to build in the tile maps, and then explain to them this is the way the systems are constructed. Now have fun building levels and use the systems that we've created and create interesting encounters for the player to go through. And then do the same thing for the enemy systems, teach people the behavior tree and finite state machine models that we were using. And allow them to build interesting kinds of enemies, but also have it well documented how they interact within our systems. And then, of course, get an army of artists because um, ISO sprites was, it takes a long time to build any one of the pieces of art,
Hmm.
especially the 8 or 16 directional sprites. Those are very labor intensive, and he knows how to do it. But if we could duplicate what he does across a team of artists, I think we would just have fun building something of a much larger scope with a much more compelling story.
Do you think that you would keep that in the visual format that you have it now, or would you expand on that into a different and deeper direction?
So like 3D models or something, or
Yeah, like kind of going from the 3D Mario jump there.
yeah, yeah. So we have toyed with the idea of doing the Sand Knight 3D because we could get away with jumping to a low poly rendition of the world. It doesn't have to be like the next step doesn't have to be Armored Core, right?
Yeah.
We're going from a pixelated game, so we could get away with a low system requirement low poly version of the
Hmm.
game. 3D is something that I'm really passionate about. The 3D character controllers, I've got a whole bank of assets that I've built over the years specifically for controlling 3D characters. And the reason that the Sand Knight is 2D is because we had a lot of great talent that created 2D assets on the team. So we just leaned into that.
One thing I don't think has really been explored much in the world of games is you go to a Comic Con or some kind of cosplay situation. There's some cosplayers who will show up in a pixelated costume of that individual, and it's kind of a unique perspective. So that may be something you can take down the road with you if you go 3D, but still make it artistically pixeled to tap into the roots there. That could be an interesting perspective to take on it.
There's camera filters you can do for that. Make it look like Doom or look like one
Yeah,
of those old school like I don't know if you ever played the arcade cabinets where you got in and there were tanks and you would just go around and it was like a very low resolution 3D world.
yeah. It goes back to my older brother's orthodontist. He had a bunch of arcade machines and very
Yeah,
interesting time. I can't even get my own child to play those kind of games anymore. They get bored too quick.
right. Yeah,
So
no, I'm just gonna throw out another
yeah.
fun idea is taking the idea of the 2D mech fighter game you played the demo, so
Hmm.
top down shooter. I think it would really lend itself well to a MOBA style game, League of Legends or Dota, where you just fight on the lanes and
Hmm.
you kill enemies, get your money, and then go back to your main base and upgrade, and then go back and forth. We have all of
Yeah.
the systems in place, and all you have to do is give the multiplayer functionality to it,
I
convert it
think
to work with that.
I think one thing that MOBA games are missing is the ability to upgrade the spawned units, like the ones that just go down the lanes.
Hmm.
And so I have a limited experience in like League of Legends and Smite, but it all seemed, you could generate them from towers, but it was just, what if you gave them armor and weapons and blended into your horde mode? That would be a pretty unique idea.
Yeah.
So tell me about some replayability. Do you think, as it is right now, there's sufficient content to keep people going after they beat it once over?
Oh yeah. Yeah, you can customize your mech to decide if you want to be very tanky or if you want to be very speedy or if you want to be a glass cannon. So at the very least there's those three ways to play the game, but there's four different weapons that you can pick up. The machine gun, the flamethrower, the plasma cannon, and the sword. And they all play very differently and they synergize with different core body upgrades better than others. So this is where you can say I want to be a a mech and I've got the swords, so I'm going to go with speed and hit points and, be able to charge into things and just be right in the middle of the fray. Whereas you can use a longer range weapon like the machine gun or the plasma cannon and just do your best to keep your recharge rate up so that nothing ever gets close to you. Yeah, so the one the thing there is when you're mixing and matching, if you really try to figure out what you're doing, there's also at the end of the game, it gives you stats. It tells you like, okay, this is how long it took you to beat the game. This is how many things you destroyed. It gives you an aggregate score based on that, and then then you get ranked. So you can see you can. It really lends itself well to who can get the best timed run and who can find the best mix and match of upgrades in order to get that run completed.
Hmm. That seems like that would really play into the hardcore gamer uh, individual, somebody who likes to do speed runs or somebody who tries to break records on Twitch. Do you feel like your game will fit into that kind of category?
I think so. Uh, I might need to add a higher difficulty mode for that because right now the game is tuned to be approachable for people who have never played the game before and even people who are not super well attuned to the genre.
Hmm.
So it's approachable. So it's the kind of game that could get people who are not normally players of this kind of game into the mechanics. But then hardcore players are probably going to find it a little bit trivial once they have it like really well understood. So I do like the idea that the mechanics are masterable, but for the sake of approachability, I have made the game a lot easier than I would prefer it to be. So a challenge mode would probably be the way to go.
Okay. What do you think was the most challenging from your perspective, development wise?
Like, what was the most challenging aspect of it?
Yeah, like what did you find to be the most, not necessarily difficult, but what did you spend the most amount of time on trying to figure out?
That any given thing wasn't too complicated to figure out, but the real challenge was so there was two elements to it. There was finding other programmers and onboarding them into the systems and getting them to not break the systems. I or understand how to, build additional mechanics into it in a way that they didn't break anything else. So I put that fault on myself for not having sufficient onboarding material or documentation on how things were put together. This is something that I've been working on. So as I move into another project, I've realized the importance of meticulous documentation. So if another programmer wants to come in and help, I can actually tell them exactly how everything that they're going to be interacting with works and how they should use it. That's I ended up being the sole programmer on the project because people would come in and they would either break it or get overwhelmed and leave. So, in both cases that didn't work.
What do you mean you
The
uploaded this file? What?
well, it's just like I brought this one guy in, he was like kind of young, he was 18 or 19, and he's just like, "Oh, I took a look at some of your core system code and I refactored some of it
No,
for you." And
jeez.
I'm like, "Tell you what, don't upload that build, man." So I need to so this is just where I'm trying to figure out ways to explain the way that the systems are put together so that it's a lot easier to collaborate from a coding standpoint. I think any indie who has ever had to work with multiple programmers can attest. It can be very, very daunting to work with other people, even on small scope projects, much less to bring somebody new into a project you've invested more than a year into and built up these systems, and you do not want them going in and just messing with whatever because it could undo
Hmm.
months of your work
You'll
and
quickly
cause you
learn
huge
process.
headaches. Yeah, yeah. So it's about systematizing that.
And
Um,
even on the flip side, when you're going out and scaling up and you're paying developers $100,000 a year, they still have to, it's going to take them 6 months to get integrated to understand what's going on, to know where the files are. And I mean, I'm thinking
right.
like AAA games, when they hire somebody, they could be a veteran of the industry, but they still don't know how it matches up with that environment.
That
And
specific project. Yeah.
yeah, and then you
Yes.
take that to a unprofessional scenario where you're just recruiting people that you like or based on their skills while you're ramping up. I can only imagine the difficulties.
Right. So I was telling you before this before this call started that I'm teaching an online boot camp, and the reason that I took this contract was it was very specifically a reason for me to create excruciatingly detailed documentation of how my systems are put together, and to create and to explain it to other people and then provide them with resources that they can use on their own time to understand how to use and change the systems. So the teaching of the boot camp is something that is enabling me to onboard people into
Mm-hmm.
projects later on.
That's awesome. You can recognize talent and try to recruit them.
Yeah, yeah. That's the other benefit. I get a whole lot of students that I'm working with, so I can recognize who might be a good candidate to invite to come in and say, "Hey, do you want to do a game jam?" Like now that I've explained to you how to build a project, they already kind of are in sync with the way that I think, and then we can see if we have chemistry by working together. And if we get past the jam part, then maybe we can collaborate on a longer term project.
Yeah, no,
So it's
offer
it's
bonus
a
points for the jam sessions. Be like, hey, extra bonus points and see how well you do.
yeah, yeah. So the other part that I wanted to talk about that was difficult was getting people into. We use the Unity game engine. Getting people into Unity to build out the levels and be level designers was extremely challenging. I ended up building probably 85% of the game's levels while also programming all of the mechanics. And it's because Unity was daunting to the people who came in to build with it. and the people who did know Unity were only able to commit so much time to building out the levels. And even then, they didn't follow all of the same conventions that I had established. So this is again back to the onboarding and explaining the process. But I don't really know the solution other than finding people who very specifically want to be level designers who are also not intimidated by using the engine. That's a challenge that is very interesting to tackle. But I think it's just a matter of introducing yourself to as many developers as you can and finding the person who by default wants to do that because I've definitely experienced that if somebody doesn't gravitate to Unity by themselves, it's not something that I recommend to try to force somebody to come into Unity, saying this is what we need you to do because it Unity takes a little bit of dedication to get comfortable with, and if they are not personally motivated to do it, then um, it's a futile effort.
Well, getting an artist to do something that's not motivated you have a better chance at solving world hunger.
Yeah, yeah, like but one of the things that I did want was the artists who were working on the tile sets. They understood how the tile sets were supposed to be used better than anyone else. But we were building the levels in Unity's tile map editor. So ultimately, at first they started out trying to give me these giant like 12K by 12K textures and I'm just like this doesn't work. Like Unity's not going to take this. You have to build it in Unity because also we use multiple layers of tile maps and they have different collision layers assigned to them, so they have different kinds of interactions with the game mechanics. So I wanted the artists who were doing the tile maps to build the levels, but that just ended up being something where they were comfortable in their sprite editing software, and they didn't really want to move to a different software like Unity.
So, what do you think if someone came to you with a lot of experience in something like Unreal Engine? Like, would that translate into Unity, or do you feel the same kind of struggle would occur?
I think if somebody has expressed the wherewithal to learn an engine, they have what it takes to learn another engine. The real question is that person willing to switch engines? Because you can help guide somebody in, but it does take a level of patience, technical acumen, and and willingness to just do the hard grit work of figuring out how the engine works and putting up with all the nonsense that entails when things go wrong.
And so, with you using something like Unity, do you feel that that holds an advantage over something like Unreal Engine, or what was your determination to go with Unity?
So Unity for a 2D project is going to be much better in general because it fundamentally produces lighter weight builds. So for a 2D project, it's much more it's much better to use than Unreal. I also happen to have about 9,000 hours of practice in Unity,
Wow.
so I'm very familiar with Unity, and I can jump in and do any given thing pretty quickly.
There was
So
that
I
whole there was that whole debacle with Unity a few months ago with the way that they made the executive decision to take quite a substantial amount of revenue from developers. I think that all got reversed very quickly.
it did
Did that impact you, or how did?
not at all. The So obviously, what they did on a fundamental level was very crappy because they were trying to retroactively change terms for games that had been released by
Hmm.
people years
Oh
ago.
wow.
So like that's kind of a bait and switch, and that just is an immoral thing to
Yeah, to
do
say
in
the
general.
least.
Yeah, because they have that clause in there, they can change it whenever. But the main people who were going to be affected were the big companies who get lots and lots of downloads, and any kind of company that tries to get ad revenue from a game. And so their whole goal is to get the maximum number of downloads and make 2 or 3 cents per download. But you get millions of downloads, then what happens? Like, oh, okay, now they're paying 12 cents per download, but they're only making 3 cents per game. So like those people, I think there's a lot of shovelware developers. Like if you've ever seen the ads for Hero Wars, I think they would be put out of business if by something like that. But then other bigger, bigger gotcha game projects would probably suffer because their whole goal is to get as many people playing as possible and go whale hunting to just extract tens of thousands of dollars from that one person who, just has more money than
Mhm.
self-control. And they you know that those are the main business models that would have been impacted. If you're doing a premium game where you're selling a game for $15, that 12-cent charge is not going to be substantial. So,
Yeah, no, absolutely. It goes back to what EA's model used to be several years ago, 2016, 2017, trying to milk the individual for their microtransactions, and it blew up in their face pretty severely.
yeah. Well,
Um,
that's the whole thing with Wall Street people, venture capitalists, getting into gaming. It does have a lot of moral questions as to what the gaming industry is actually doing. Are they tapping into Skinner box psychological weaknesses, um, tapping into gambling addictions for people?
mhm.
And it's just a matter of extracting money from people, but you are exploiting the creative talent of people who really enjoy what games can be, but then the makers, the people who are actually in charge, are making, questionable decisions simply for the sake of making a buck. And it's something that a lot of developers really wrestle with, and it's why I think indies really need to be supported, because the big companies are very quickly going the way of making games that extract money rather than making games that give memorable experiences.
It makes total sense. So, what are some games that you play currently that aren't ones that you make? Do you have a favorite game in today's time, or do you play much games elsewhere?
Yeah, so there's a few games that I play. I don't play a wide variety of games anymore. So I have fallen into that trap where I like to play the games that I'm familiar with. Um, have you ever heard of the game Speedrunners?
Not of a game titled that specifically. No.
Yeah, yeah. There's a game called Speedrunners. It was like early access in 2014, and that's when I got into it. It's a racing game that's like a mix between Mario Kart, Smash Brothers, and Sonic. And
Interesting.
it's 2D. You run in a loop, and the goal is to use momentum mechanics to outrace your opponents. And it's very fun and very compelling. I play that periodically. There's there's old school MMOs. I'm not really playing modern MMOs so much as I go into the um, classic servers for like World of Warcraft or EverQuest. I'm kind of meh about Blizzard, so I haven't been playing the WoW classics, but um, EverQuest TLPs are good. My fiance got me into Skyrim, so I managed to miss that when it first came out because I was doing the construction supply thing in that era, and I had a whole lot of fun getting into that over the past year and a half. Dragon Age Origins, I played. That one was a lot of fun. I've been playing Clash Royale. I know I was just talking about the gotcha games that extract money from you, but I was commissioned to teach a class on how to clone Clash Royale. So I got the game in order to learn the mechanics so I could clone it, and I found that it was a lot of fun. It scratches all the psychological itches that you want. It's a wonderful case study in gotcha mechanics, let me tell you. Like,
I don't know if you've ever had the experience of playing games that started out as indie game, gained a tremendous, I mean, international level of popularity, what seems to be overnight. And then the developers abandon the game. Some that come to mind is like Daisy, Reign of Kings. Have you ever experienced either of those?
I have not.
How do you feel about indie game devs who have a game that just skyrocketed into the international scene and then they abandon that? Do you think there's a reason behind it, or
There's a couple reasons that I can think of. The first is, maybe they're just not comfortable with their game being that popular, and they feel the pressures of celebrity coming on, and they just like get an anxiety attack, and they just can't cope with that, so they just back off. Or maybe they feel that there's pressure to push the game in a direction that they don't want to go, so they just say, "Listen, this project is my baby. I don't want to do that." The other reason that I can think of is they make enough money to retire, and then they're just
Yeah.
exhausted and they just quit. They're just
Like,
like,
see
we
ya.
can finally stop, guys. We're done.
We did it. Yeah, and
Yeah.
sometimes that's the most disappointing when you really fall in love with a game as a game player, and then you hear that they've stopped developing it. And sometimes they say they moved on to another game. Sometimes they don't give an answer, but ultimately it's just as a player, it's like this was such a treasure, and then to see it left in the dirt. I'm such a personally, I like multiplayer games, so I get a lot
Yeah.
of fun and enjoyment out of playing with my friends. And there are some single player games, but they're very rare for me. So Baldur's Gate 3 being kind of a recent example of that. But it has an incredible amount of depth. I have not played a game that every time I resave or reload a save that I get a different experience, and it both pisses me off and makes me excited.
Right.
It's like I expected to do this battle different or the same way and then beat it, but then it did different stuff, and I'm like, I don't get it. But so tell me a little bit about what's next for you. What is next for your development team, and are you going to continue developing this game if it grows in popularity, or are you going to move on to a different iteration or a different game altogether?
So I think mainly the future for Sand Knight, we're going to put it out in front of YouTubers and Twitch streamers and try to see how the world receives it, even if it doesn't get, you know, world-shattering levels of attention or commercial success. What we're going to do is take all of the feedback that we get, figure out where all the rough edges are, and smooth it out. So it's not going to be abandoned as it is currently, but we're definitely going to make it the best, most polished experience that we can within the scope that it exists currently. Personally, what my goals are in this coming year, I'm my goal is to get better at working with a team so that in future projects I don't have to be the sole programmer. The but I want to focus on making multiplayer games, like you were just saying. My company is called Landline Games because I think back to the era of the 90s when I used to have sleepovers with my friends and stay up all night playing N64, blast people on GoldenEye or Mario Kart.
Yes.
um, you know, Doritos, Mountain Dew, and pizza. That's what it was about. But then also the LAN parties. I used to have so much fun playing games like Age of Empires, StarCraft, Battlezone, Civilization. But when you play with your friends in the same room, I I really really enjoy what can spring forth in the memories that you make.
Mhm.
It's the it's the kind of memories that when you fast forward in your life and you're laying on your deathbed, you're gonna think back to that one night when you owned everybody on GoldenEye and just think nice, right? It's gonna be one of those
I
memories.
pwned you.
Yeah, yeah. Just be like, yeah, yeah, Zach got it there. Like, it can seem silly, but ultimately, like those are the memories and experiences that we have that make life worth living. You can do all of the, you know, financial success, career success that you can, but like it's the memories that you share with the people that were close to you and the bonds that you formed during these kinds of experiences that really carry through your entire life. I've got lifelong friends that our key bonding moments were when we were playing games together. And I want to create the kinds of games that can deliver that to people who are the right age to form those bonds now, right? Or build games that parents can play with their kids and share those bonding moments. Like that's the whole reason that I want to
Mhm.
make games, because of the kinds of memories that they can forge with the players, and multiplayer really lends itself to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me personally, I remember the two big games landing for me was Total Annihilation and Halo, the original Halo. And
Yeah,
so we
yeah,
would have a Friday night. I'm 16 years old. We'd grab a bunch of friends. I had a Ford F-150 as like a 1992 model, and we would just throw everything in the back. Xbox, these old CRT TVs, and we would go to someone's house. I don't even half the time I didn't know whose house we were at, and we would
right.
just set up and their mom would order pizza, and we would just play till 3 in the morning until we couldn't play anymore.
Yeah.
And you don't really get a lot of that experience these days because the way the internet has unfolded and added to the convenience level, it's provided more capabilities for people to enjoy that, but it's kind of stripped away from those who had the option to in-person LAN. If there was ever a way for a game to develop kind of the multiplayer scene today, but add in a little bit of that LAN
LAN support.
sensation, it would, I think, go a long way. And there's still a lot of tournament hosts out there. I mean, MLG has kind of come and gone, but other competitive formats have cropped up. And so I think for those reasons, LAN is still alive. And if there could be a game that really caters to, you want to enjoy this experience shoulder to shoulder versus somebody that you'll never see online. You could play it like that, but it won't be the maximum enjoyment. So whatever that is, I'm not sure. It just nostalgia, you know.
Yeah, the last game that I played that had that kind of experience was Castle Crashers.
Okay, yeah.
And I had a friend of mine come over. She introduced it to me, and we played through the whole Castle Crashers sequence over a period of like 3 or 4 different play sessions, and it was amazing because it was like, let's just rock through this game together, and it was really a lot of fun. And so I really am a fan of the co-op adventure where you just go side by side with your buddies and play the game. I like the Lego games for that reason.
Okay, yeah. My I'm familiar with a lot of those through my game or my kid, because she plays incredible Legos or the Star Wars Legos, and they even have a Lego game where you like that bridge building one, and you try to put Legos together to see what bridges hold up. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, but I 100% agree with what you're saying, that there's nothing like having a LAN party. Oh, Diablo 2 was another good one.
Oh
You
yeah,
throw together your
God,
just
those
type your
cows.
type your IP in, and then you play LAN together, or maybe you go on BattleNet, who knows? But yeah, it's that whole goal of playing with your friends in person. I want to see if I can't, like, you can't cut out the online multiplayer. But what's actually nice about having the non-online option is that you don't have to pay to upkeep the servers. So, as a
Absolutely.
developer, you're on the hook for keeping those online servers running. If you make your game online only for multiplayer, then, if at any point something ever happens to you, then online goes down. Or, like if your game isn't financially successful, you just won't have online servers.
So many games have gone to the graveyard over the past few decades for that reason.
Right.
And I mean, some even worse case scenarios where it's like SimCity 2013. They made it online only, and it was a complete flop in their face because there was no multiplayer experience to be had, but yet they required online servers. And it was like, dude, what are you guys doing?
Yeah. Yeah, and people put so many hundreds or thousands of hours on the game,
Yeah.
and then they're just paying for every hour the person's playing. Yeah, I don't want to like force myself into a situation where I have to microtransaction or add the heck out of my players so I can keep paying for the servers. Like they got a router. Like, just play with your friends over the router.
Yeah. Oh, geez. When did you ever play Total Annihilation? You had mentioned Age of Empires and StarCraft. Did you ever play Total Annihilation?
No, that one escaped me.
Yeah, it was very interesting RTS back then. It had unlimited unit cap, so unlike Age of Empires where you had to build up to like 100 or so, this one you could spam as many as your CPU could handle, and we'd be playing so late game that like it was 5 frames per second, and it was just waiting to destroy the other person. We had bought a router, a cheap like $25 router from Walmart, and this was 2008 at the latest. And I remember this thing going up in smoke when we had connected like 4 different computers to it. And it was just, what the heck? I've never seen a router do that before.
It literally smoked?
Yeah, literally smoked. Just
That's amazing.
We unplugged and stopped playing it. And so I just couldn't believe it. It was, I couldn't even remember the brand now, but just some off-brand Walmart router that they had mid 2000s. So, they've come a long way since then.
That's like a different kind of win condition.
Yeah.
You
It's
guys didn't realize it, but it was co-op all the time.
yeah. It's like we lost or we won. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, Rick, this has been an absolute pleasure to be able to sit down and speak with you today and to go through the details of your game and learn about, you as a developer. So I really thank you for taking the time out and just explaining and going through all this with me. Is there anything that you want to add at the last end here, or
I guess just give my game a shot. The Sand Knight. It's available on Steam. You can play the demo on our website, thesandknight.com, and just keep gaming and enjoy gaming with your friends.
that's what it comes down to? Enjoy the game. It's now a part of life itself, and makes me wonder what the past 10,000 years humans have been doing, besides staring up at stars. So
Hey, you know what? Everything is a game. Gaming starts at peekaboo
exactly.
and goes to tag and goes from there.
Oh, fantastic. Hey, I hope to have you on here again. And good luck to your game and its release. I hope it does wonders. I'm going to go back and play it again. And we'll make sure to add all the links to the YouTube video once we get it up. So I can't say thanks enough. And it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me.